Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. Today's video is going to be on the Chinese economy, or specifically growing concerns for the health of the Chinese financial system. For this video, we will examine, with supplementary commentary, 2 recent important reports on this theme. One is from a Western expert, Nicholas Bors, Vice President and Director of China Research at Seafarer Capital Partners, who published a recent piece called China's Balance Sheet Challenge, looking at issues surrounding Chinese debt. The second report, published on Monday of this week, is from the China-based, state-backed Chinese Academy of Fiscal Sciences think tank, and looks at a theme which we on China Update have been following for some time: local government fiscal stress. Let's begin with Nicholas Burst's report. Quote, "After a decade of rapid credit growth, China is now much more indebted than countries at similar levels of economic development. The slowdown in the economy over the past year has increased pressure on over-leveraged borrowers, posing risks for the financial system. China has 3 main options to address these problems: using the central government's balance sheet, readjusting the fiscal balance sheet, or selling state assets. If instead Beijing chooses to simply muddle through, it faces the risk of a Japanese-style lost decade." End quote. The report includes a lot of excellent data and explanation, and we're now going to move through the report's graphs and observations. China's debt increased by an astonishing $37 trillion between 2012 and 2022. As of June 30th, 2022, it reached around $52 trillion, 75% greater than the outstanding stock of debt in all other emerging markets combined. For comparison, the report points out, the total assets of all commercial banks in the United States was around $23 trillion at the end of 2022. China's debt is massive, the report argues, in both absolute terms and relative to the size of its economy. Its debt levels are also high compared with those of other emerging markets, the United States, and the average for the G20 economies. The growth in debt during this period was concentrated among specific borrowers, with 3/4 of the $36 trillion increase coming from corporate and governmental borrowers. Although household debt grew as well, household savings remained extraordinarily high, serving as a buffer against financial risks. The report argues that SOEs, real estate developers, and local government represent China's weakest balance sheets. SOEs, because of high debt levels and low productivity. With more than $29 trillion in liabilities at the end of 2021, they, SOEs, are the largest corporate borrowers in China. Real estate developers are also highly leveraged and susceptible to liquidity pressures. In early 2022, the International Monetary Fund estimated that Chinese real estate developers had liabilities at risk of default worth more than 12% of GDP. And then there are local governments, or specifically local government financing vehicles. The report argues that many local governments and their associated local government financing vehicles have problematic balance sheets because of the severe imbalances in the Chinese fiscal system. Quote, "Beginning with the budgetary reforms of 1994, local governments have faced chronic spending requirements that significantly outstrip their official revenues. Compounding the problem, local governments have largely been prohibited from borrowing directly. Local governments established various non-tax revenue streams and off-balance sheet borrowing channels to compensate for the shortfall. These alternative revenue and financing sources often far exceeded official tax revenues." End quote. One way around these borrowing restrictions was to establish local government financing vehicles, shell companies, as the report bluntly calls them. In this way, widespread off-balance sheet borrowing by local government financing vehicles occurred for years. Quote, "Despite repeated efforts by Beijing to crack down on this type of debt." End quote. Local governments and local government financing vehicles issued nearly $5 trillion in debt in less than a decade. Quote, "An amount larger than the US municipal bond market." End quote. with the report adding that during the past year, the fiscal situation of local governments has deteriorated due to increasing expenses and declining revenues. More on this later. The high debt load of many localities jeopardizes their ability to continue to provide financial support to local government financing vehicles. Now, let's leave our exploration of this excellent report here. There is much more covered in the report, and I would highly recommend it to anyone interested in this particular area. Let's end with this final observation from the author. Quote, "Policymakers should embrace the debt challenge as an impetus to reform China's fiscal system and adjust the role of government in the economy. These changes could once again set China on a path to more rapid growth. Doing so, however, would require a major shift in the Xi administration's ideological approach to the economy." End quote. Next up, part 2. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. If you're part of the 50% of viewers who do not subscribe to the channel and you do like this sort of content, maybe consider subscribing. And as always, anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep this channel sustainable. The channel relies primarily on subscriber support to keep going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. The next report is from a Chinese think tank. We will be a bit more brief in examining this report as it deals with a theme we have covered a lot in recent weeks, and indeed expands on some of the themes discussed in the first report: local government fiscal strain. The Chinese Academy of Fiscal Sciences report is based on surveys with 521 city and county level finance departments, and details how local governments have relied heavily on transfer payments and, quote, accumulated a huge pile of debt to finance their day-to-day operations and underpin local economies, end quote. Last year, the so-called fiscal self-sufficiency rate of local governments, this is the revenue to spending ratio, dropped 4.3 percentage points to 48.4%. Regular viewers of China Update know the reason why, of course. Increased zero-COVID spending and hits to revenue from economic slowdown and the housing crisis. The Beijing-based think tank warns that despite a likely economic rebound this year, fiscal stress is going to continue inflicting pain on localities across the country, just to a lesser degree than in 2022. On the revenue side, the economic rebound this year should increase income from regular tax sources. There will also be less tax cuts needed to boost business confidence if moderate consumer demand returns this year. Last year, some localities sold assets as a one-off fix to their revenue shortfalls. According to Finance Ministry data, non-tax revenue in the National General Public Budget surged 24.4% last year. The think tank report estimates that state sales of assets will decline this year, though we note that some economists believe that China's balance sheet issues should fall on local governments rather than on businesses and households, and be paid for through selling state assets. Income from the sale of land use rights was another source of local government revenue, which plunged last year. We have, of course, covered this thoroughly. There is a big question mark over how the land use sales market will perform this year, and Beijing has sought to play down its importance to the overall fiscal health of the government. Of course, if state-backed developers or local government financing vehicles are directed to step in and buy the land this year, like in 2022, then the land sales revenue is there, but through a very unhealthy and unsustainable mechanism. According to the Chinese Academy of Fiscal Sciences report, more than half of residential land by value was sold to local government financing vehicles last year, adding, quote, much of the land remains undeveloped, end quote. On the other side of the fiscal coin, of course, is spending. We remember that according to the Finance Ministry, expenditure in the local general public budget grew 6.4% in 2022, with zero COVID measures and infrastructure spending to counter the collapse in housing construction driving this jump. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin reports that fiscal spending on health grew 17.8% nationwide in 2022, year-on-year. Social welfare and employment spending increased 8.1% during the same period. These spending obligations should moderate this year, assuming there isn't another more nasty outbreak, whether of COVID or of a geopolitical nature. Okay, so that is the second report. We have covered a lot in today's video, and a lot of this is also quite specialized. There are a few conceptual balls that we have in the air right now, but it's important that we are aware of these as we move into 2023 and follow the Chinese economy. So let's simplify these main points here. China's financial system faces deep, systemic, medium to long-term challenges, and this is heavily tied to the fiscal system and demands both political and economic reforms. This situation has been exacerbated over the last few years, and especially in 2022. 2023 looks like it will be a more positive year for the economy generally, as business and household confidence sees some rebound. This will reduce, though not completely remove, the pressure on the government fiscal system, and perhaps buy policymakers more time to figure out the necessary reforms to deal with its systemic financial challenge. These are the points we keep in mind as we move into 2023. And on this final point, let's end today's video with this observation made today. Quote, "The problem here is that this, the necessary reforms, is a politically charged endeavor, to say the least, but the only likely outcomes are either a rapid adjustment, i.e. a financial crisis, which is still pretty unlikely, or a slow Japanese-style adjustment." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. I know it was quite heavy and specialized, but this is very important to cover, so I hope you enjoyed it, or at least got some value from the episode. Wherever you are, have a wonderful Friday. I hope you're planning a lovely weekend ahead, and I will see you all tomorrow.